When I tell people I worked as a common laborer, I could always see it on their faces. The pause, the polite nod, the quiet judgment. But I never imagined my own husband would be the one to cast me out over it. I stayed when things fell apart. I worked with my hands to keep our life together. And one day, without an argument or warning, he erased me like I was something shameful he wanted to forget. I didn't fight him. I didn't beg to be chosen. I simply disappeared, and 7 years later, he suddenly remembered I existed for a reason I never expected. Before I tell you how I quietly walked away and what changed everything years later, do me a small favor. Subscribe, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and help this story reach the people who might recognize themselves in it. I'm 34 now, but the version of me this story begins with was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Back then, I was married to Daniel, living in Ridgewood Falls and working long shifts at ironclad manufacturing. The job was loud, hot, and honest. I knew my clock and time. I knew my paycheck down to the dollar. And at the end of the day, I could point to something real and say, I built that. I didn't land there by accident. Years earlier, my dad died suddenly, leaving a mess of bills and a house that needed repairs we couldn't afford. I had options, college acceptance letters, a different path, but staying felt necessary. Daniel said he understood. He said we were a team. He said it was temporary. Temporary turned into my life. At first, Daniel didn't complain. Or maybe he did, just quietly. Little comments slipped out when he thought they were jokes. You smell like the plant again. You sure you don't want something cleaner? I told myself it was stress. I told myself love could handle rough edges. His family didn't bother hiding their opinions. Rebecca, his sister, measured success in titles and brunch photos. Lucas, his younger brother, had just started climbing the corporate ladder and wore it like a badge. Family gatherings became performances. Promotions were announced. Salaries hinted at. I was the one asked to take photos, refill drinks, help in the kitchen. Useful. Invisible. Daniel stopped defending me slowly, which somehow hurt more than if he'd stopped all at once. He'd say, they don't mean it like that, or it's just how they are. He'd suggest I skip certain events because it would be less awkward. Less awkward for who, he never said. Then came Brother's Day. I was in the break room, peeling back the lid on my lunch when my phone buzzed. The family group chat. I almost ignored it. Almost. The message was short and precise. Brother's Day breakfast. Excellent kids, only. Names listed. Lucas praised. Then, like an afterthought sharpened into a blade, the line meant for me. Common labor. Abandoned. I read it twice. 3 times. Waiting for a correction. A follow-up. A joke emoji to soften the blow. Nothing came. Rebecca reacted with a heart. Lucas posted a smiling photo. Daniel stayed silent. That silence told me everything. I finished my shift like a ghost. I went home, packed quietly, and left my ring on the counter with a note that said exactly 1 sentence. I won't stay where I'm treated like waste. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I blocked the group chat and every number attached to it. I slept on my friend Hannah's couch that night, staring at the ceiling, feeling strangely calm. Not relieved. Not broken. Just done. What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that leaving wasn't me giving up. It was me choosing to live. And while they thought I'd fade out quietly, I was already building something they'd never be able to erase. The first few weeks after I left were quieter than I expected. No dramatic messages. No midnight calls. No apologies dressed up as concern. Just silence, thick, deliberate, and revealing. I stayed on Hannah's couch longer than I planned. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that I just needed a few days to breathe before figuring out my next move. But days turned into weeks. And the truth was I didn't know who I was without constantly bracing myself for judgment. Hannah never rushed me. She'd leave a mug of coffee on the table in the mornings, ask if I wanted company, and let me exist without commentary. That alone felt radical. I kept going to work at ironclad manufacturing like nothing had happened. Same alarm, same boots, same grease-stained locker. The factory didn't care that my marriage had imploded or that my husband had publicly discarded me like an inconvenience. The machines still needed running. The lines still needed hands. There was comfort in that. But something inside me had shifted. I stopped checking my phone during breaks. Stopped expecting Daniel to come to his senses. I realized that if he could erase me with one message and no defense, then whatever we had wasn't love, it was convenience. A week after I left, Hannah asked gently, "Do you think he'll call?" I thought about it and surprised myself by answering honestly, "I think he thinks I'll come back." That was the part that stung. Daniel didn't chase me because he assumed I was still his, that I'd cool off, that I'd eventually apologize for embarrassing him by existing outside the image his family approved of. I didn't go back. Instead, I downsized my life. I found a tiny studio apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet. I bought secondhand furniture, a mattress on the floor, a small table that doubled as a desk. It wasn't a downgrade. It was freedom. I changed my number. I didn't announce it. Didn't post anything. Just quietly severed the thread that tied me to a life where I was always being measured and found lacking. Work became my anchor. I volunteered for extra shifts, learned new machines, asked questions most people avoided because they sounded basic. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was trying to feel solid again. One night, after a 12-hour shift, I sat alone on my floor eating takeout and realized something uncomfortable. I missed being needed. Not loved, needed. I'd spent so long being the dependable one, the steady one, the person who filled in gaps without complaint, that when I stopped doing it, there was an emptiness I didn't know how to name. Daniel and his family had relied on that version of me. And when I stopped playing the role, they didn't know what to do with the silence. A month passed, then two. Still nothing. No call from Daniel. No message asking where I'd gone. No attempt to fix what he broke. And that hurt more than the message itself, because it confirmed what I'd started to suspect. He hadn't lost me. He'd replaced the idea of me with relief. So I stopped waiting. I enrolled in night classes at Ridgewood Technical Institute. Nothing glamorous. Courses on systems operations, safety coordination, and production management. I didn't tell anyone. Not Hannah. Not my coworkers. This wasn't a comeback story. It was survival with intention. 3 nights a week, I'd change in a locker room, pull on a hoodie, and sit in classrooms full of people younger than me, older than me, people who were rebuilding or starting late or starting over. Nobody cared where I came from. Nobody asked about my marriage or my background. They cared if I showed up and did the work. For the first time in years, I felt proud without needing permission. That pride was quiet, internal, real. Meanwhile, Daniel's absence stretched on. I heard through mutual acquaintances, nothing direct, that he'd told people we'd grown apart, that my job had changed our priorities, that he wished me well. I let him have that narrative, because while he was explaining my absence, I was becoming someone who didn't need to be explained away. By the end of the first year, I was promoted to shift lead. Not because I asked, because I'd already been doing the work. The raise wasn't huge, but it was enough to breathe easier. Enough to stop counting pennies at the grocery store. I still didn't post about it. Success doesn't need witnesses when it's real. Years passed like that, steady, quiet, intentional. I built routines, built confidence, built a life that didn't flinch when someone looked down on it. And just when I thought Daniel and his family had completely forgotten me, the past knocked. Not gently, and not without an agenda. I didn't hear Daniel's name for a long time. Not in conversation, not in passing, not even in the quiet corners of my mind where old habits sometimes linger. When you stop being pulled toward someone, the absence becomes natural, like background noise fading until you don't remember when it stopped. 5 years had passed by then. My life looked nothing like it used to. I was still at Ironclad Manufacturing, but no longer on the floor. I had moved into operations coordination, then systems oversight. I supervised people who used to supervise me. I wore the same steel-toed boots out of habit, not necessity, and kept my hands busy because it reminded me where I came from. I liked being underestimated. It made people careless. I lived alone in a better apartment now, still modest, but mine. Plants on the windowsill, books stacked everywhere. Quiet evenings that felt earned instead of empty. Hannah joked that I'd turned into someone who knew herself, and she wasn't wrong. Then one afternoon, while I was reviewing production schedules, my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened later, my stomach dropped. It was Rebecca. Her voice was softer than I remembered. Careful, like she was speaking to a wild animal that might bolt if startled. Emma, it's Rebecca. I know this is probably unexpected. We really need to talk. It's about Daniel. I didn't call back. I sat with that voicemail for 2 days. Played it once more just to confirm it was real. The woman who'd once watched me be erased without blinking was now asking for my time. On the third day, curiosity won. I texted back one line. What do you want? Her reply came almost instantly. Things aren't good. Daniel isn't doing well. We were hoping you could help. Help. That word used to own me. I didn't agree to meet. Didn't offer sympathy. I simply said I wasn't interested. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next few weeks, the messages multiplied. Rebecca. Then Lucas. Then even Daniel, using a new number. Apologies trickled in, thin and awkward. Words like miscommunication, stress, family pressure. No one mentioned the group chat message directly. No one said abandoned. They circled the truth without touching it. Finally, Daniel called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me wanted to hear his voice, not because I missed it, but because I wanted to know who he'd become without the version of me he discarded. He sounded tired. He told me he'd lost his job, that the company downsized, that the reputation he'd leaned on hadn't saved him. He was living back at his childhood home now, that Rebecca was worried, that the family was going through a lot. I listened, didn't interrupt, didn't comfort. Then he said it. I should have stood up for you. There it was. Late, quiet, incomplete. He didn't ask me to come back. Not exactly. He talked around it, describing how things used to be when I kept him grounded. How I was always strong. How he hadn't realized what he'd lost until things fell apart. I let him finish. Then I said calmly, you didn't lose me. You let me go. He went quiet. I told him I hoped he figured things out, that I wasn't angry anymore, that I'd moved on. He asked if we could meet. I said no. That night, I sat alone and felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because the moment I'd feared, the moment they came back, had finally happened. And it had no power over me. But they weren't done testing that boundary. A month later, Rebecca showed up at my workplace. Security called me to the front desk. There's a woman here asking for you. Says she's family. I looked down from my office window and saw her standing there, clutching her purse like it was an argument she planned to win. I didn't go down. I told security she wasn't authorized to be there. When she finally left, my phone filled with missed calls and messages. Accusations now. Hurt feelings. Claims that I was being cruel. I blocked every number. And that's when the real panic started. Because people who are used to erasing, you don't know how to react when you refuse to reappear. They tried guilt, then nostalgia, then urgency. Daniel sent one last message before I blocked him too. I don't recognize you anymore. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Then I replied, that's because you never did. 7 years after I disappeared, they finally understood what it meant. And it terrified them. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because the final lesson wasn't about what they lost. It was about what I chose to protect. After I blocked them, the silence didn't come immediately. That's the thing people don't tell you about boundaries. When you finally set them, the people who benefited from you having none will push harder than ever. Silence is what comes after they exhaust every manipulation they know. For weeks, I felt the ripple effects. Mutual acquaintances started reaching out under the guise of just checking in. Old co-workers of Daniel's suddenly remember my name. Distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years found my social media profiles that I barely used and sent vague messages like family matters and life is too short to hold grudges. I didn't respond to any of it, not because I was angry, because I was done explaining. What surprised me most was how calm I felt. I'd spent years bracing myself for the moment my past tried to reclaim me, convinced it would crack something open inside me. Instead, it felt like watching a storm through thick glass. Loud, chaotic, but unable to reach me. Then, 6 months later, something happened that changed the tone entirely. I got a letter. A physical one. No return address. My name written carefully on the envelope. Like someone trying very hard to look respectful. I almost threw it away unopened. But I didn't. Inside was a single page, written by Daniel. Not typed. Handwritten. He apologized. Properly this time. No excuses. No justifications. He admitted he'd chosen comfort over character. Approval over partnership. He admitted he'd let his sister decide who I was worth instead of standing beside me. He wrote that he didn't expect forgiveness. That he wasn't asking for reconciliation. That he finally understood how much damage he'd allowed because it was easier than confronting his family. At the end, he wrote one sentence that stayed with me. I don't want anything from you. I just didn't want to leave the world without saying this. I sat on my couch for a long time after reading it, and for the first time I believed him. That letter didn't reopen wounds. It closed one. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Life moved forward the way it does. Quietly, steadily, without asking permission. I took a new role overseeing multiple departments. I traveled for work. I started mentoring younger women who came from backgrounds like mine, women who'd been told in subtle and not so subtle ways that they were less than because their hands are calloused instead of manicured. I told them the truth. That dignity isn't assigned by title. That respect isn't granted by proximity to the right people. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without explaining yourself. On my 34th birthday, I took the day off. No party. No big plans. Just me, coffee, and a long walk through the city. I stopped at a small diner near the river and ate pancakes by myself, watching people live their ordinary lives. Couples arguing softly. Parents negotiating with toddlers. Construction workers laughing too loud. Real life. Not curated. Not impressive. Just honest. That evening, I got a message from Hannah. You know it's been 7 years today, right? I did. 7 years since the message. 7 years since I quietly stepped out of a life that didn't want me unless I fit a certain shape. I didn't feel sad. I felt proud. Because I hadn't just survived being discarded. I'd built something that couldn't be taken away. A few weeks later, I ran into Rebecca one last time. Not intentionally. I was at a bookstore, browsing the clearance shelf, when I sensed someone watching me. I looked up and saw her frozen halfway down the aisle, recognition written all over her face. She looked older, smaller. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she walked toward me slowly, cautiously, like she expected me to disappear if she came too close. Emma, she said. I nodded. Rebecca. She swallowed. You look well. I am. She hesitated. Then, quietly, I owe you an apology. I didn't say anything. She continued anyway. What I did, what I allowed, it was wrong. I thought I was protecting my family. I didn't realize I was destroying it. I studied her face. There was regret there. Real regret. But regret doesn't obligate reconciliation. I hope you find peace, I said honestly. Her eyes filled with tears. I wish things had been different. So do I replied. And I meant it. Not because I wanted her back in my life, but because no one wins in a story like that. We stood there for another second. Then she nodded, stepped aside, and let me pass. That was it. No confrontation. No dramatic closure. No reconciliation montage. Just two people acknowledging reality. As I walked home that night, I realized something important. I used to think revenge meant proving them wrong. Becoming successful enough that they regretted underestimating me. Living loudly so they couldn't ignore me anymore. But that wasn't it. Real freedom came from no longer needing their recognition at all. They didn't get to rewrite the story. They didn't get access to the life I built after they decided I wasn't worth standing beside. I wasn't abandoned. I was released. And I used that freedom to build a life rooted in respect, stability, and self-worth. Things no one can take away once you claim them for yourself. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When someone tells you your value depends on fitting their definition of success, believe them. Not because they're right, but because they're showing you exactly how small their world is. You don't owe your future to people who couldn't honor your present. And sometimes, the most powerful response isn't confrontation. It's disappearing long enough to become someone they can never control again. That's how the story ends. Not with revenge. With peace, and a life that finally feels like mine. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts in the comments or tell us where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them.